The smog over Los Angeles lay thick and yellow on the morning of March 14, 1951, a greasy film that promised another scorching day. Down on Central Avenue, the street was already alive with the sounds of streetcars and delivery trucks, but in the small bungalow Lena Washington shared with her mother and younger brother, the air was still. Lena, 20 years old, with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pressed into a neat pageboy, moved with practiced quiet through the kitchen. She ironed her best white blouse, the one she saved for work, the radio playing a low jazz tune that barely penetrated her thoughts. She had come to Hollywood not to be a star, she knew better than that, but to be one of the people who made the stars. She was a receptionist at Apex Pictures, a stepping stone, she told herself, to a real job in a production office, maybe even, if she dared to dream it, a junior producer role. It was an impossible dream for a black girl in 1951, but Lena was fueled by a sharp-edged optimism that hadn't yet been dulled by the world. Her commute was a journey between planets. She took the streetcar from the vibrant, crowded world of South Central, transferring twice until she arrived at the massive white gates of Apex Pictures in Burbank. Here, the grass was impossibly green, the buildings were gleaming stucco fantasies, and everyone, from the gardeners to the executives, looked like they'd been polished. Lena was one of only 3 black employees on the executive lot, and the other 2 worked in the mailroom. She manned the reception desk in the Thalberg building, her voice a model of crisp, professional courtesy. Apex Pictures, how may I direct your call? Her real job, the one that mattered, was as the special assistant to Arthur Vance, the studio's most promising vice president of production. Vance was 42, with a politician's smile, Kennedy blonde hair, and a charisma that could bend steel. He was married to an heiress, had 2 perfect children in a sprawling Pasadena estate, and was renowned for his golden touch, turning B-movies into blockbusters. He'd discovered Lena, plucked her from the typing pool, told her he saw a spark in her. He gave her scripts to read, asked her opinion on rough cuts, made her feel for the first time that her ambition wasn't a joke. He made her feel seen. And then, 6 months ago, he'd cornered her in the screening room after a late showing, his hand on her arm, his voice low and persuasive, telling her she was special, that this was how things worked. The affair was a secret that lived in her stomach like a cold stone, a series of late-night meetings in his private office, hurried encounters in bungalows on the studio lot, and one weekend at a work retreat in Palm Springs. Lena knew the imbalance, the danger, but she was trapped between her ambition and his power, mistaking the blinding glare of his attention for a spotlight. 2 weeks ago, the cold stone in her stomach had become something else entirely. A missed period, then another. Morning sickness she'd managed to hide by blaming bad coffee. Yesterday, a doctor in a small, discreet clinic on her side of town had confirmed it. Now, she had to tell him. She waited until 6 p.m., when the lot had emptied and the executives were heading for their cocktail shakers. She knocked on his heavy oak door. Mr. Vance. He was on the phone, 1 foot up on his polished desk, laughing. He waved her in, finished the call, and beamed at her. Lena, sweetheart. What's the fire? She stood before his desk, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She couldn't look him in the eye. Arthur, she said, the use of his first name reserved only for their private moments. I went to the doctor. I'm pregnant. The smile didn't vanish, it froze. It became a mask, a perfect, polished thing that didn't touch his eyes. He sat up slowly, putting both feet on the floor. He tented his fingers. I see, he said. The 2 words hung in the expensive, air-conditioned quiet. Lena's voice trembled, a tiny, desperate sound. I don't know what to do. I didn't want to bother you, but He stood up, walked around the desk, and put his hands on her shoulders. It was meant to be reassuring, but it felt like a vice. Now, Lena. There's no need to panic. We are in this together. This is our problem, and I will handle it. I handle problems for a living, remember? He stroked her hair, his touch suddenly repulsive. This is just a little complication. Nothing that can't be fixed. I know a man, a doctor. Very discreet, the best. He helps the studio with all sorts of problems, starlets who get themselves into trouble. You understand? Lena just nodded, tears welling, relief and shame warring within her. He was going to fix it. He wasn't casting her aside. I'll make a call, he said, his voice bright and efficient again. Go home. Get some rest. And not a word, Lena. Not to anyone. This is our secret. It has to be, to protect you. And the studio. That night, she told her mother, Viola, that she was working late. Arthur Vance picked her up not from the studio gates, but a block away, in his gleaming black Cadillac. It was the first time she'd ever been in his personal car. He drove, not back toward her neighborhood, but up into the Hollywood Hills, the roads twisting and turning, the city lights spreading out below them like a carpet of diamonds. It's a beautiful view, isn't it? He said, making small talk, his hand resting on the seat between them. Anything's possible here, Lena. You just have to be smart about it. He turned off the main road onto a dark, unpaved drive that led to a half-finished house. It was just a frame, skeletal against the night sky, overlooking a canyon. The doctor meets his patients here, Vance said smoothly. It's more private. Lena looked at the dark, empty frame. The first prickle of real fear, cold and sharp, cut through her anxiety. Where is he? He's running late, Vance said, killing the engine. The silence of the hills rushed in, absolute and suffocating. Let's wait inside. He got out, and Lena, trusting, obedient, followed him onto the concrete slab that would one day be a magnificent living room. She looked out at the lights. Arthur, I'm scared. Don't be, he said. He was standing behind her. I told you. I'm going to take care of everything. She turned, and in the faint moonlight, she saw he was holding a tire iron from the trunk of his car. His face was no longer smiling. The mask was gone, and beneath it was nothing she recognized, just a cold, terrifying emptiness. She opened her mouth to scream, but the first blow caught her high on the temple. The sound was a wet, sickening crack that echoed briefly in the canyon before being swallowed by the night. She fell without a sound, her eyes wide with a terrible, final understanding. He'd never seen her at all. Back on Central Avenue, Viola Washington waited up, as she always did. By 2 a.m., she was frantic. By morning, she was calling the studio. Mr. Vance's new secretary, a sharp-voiced blonde, informed her that Miss Washington had not reported for her shift. No, she hadn't called in. Mr. Vance was in conference and couldn't be disturbed. Viola went to the 77th Street station of the LAPD. The desk sergeant, a beefy man chewing a cigar, took down the report with bored indifference. Lena Washington, 20, colored. Last seen, where? At work? She probably ran off, sweetheart, he said, not unkindly, but with the weary certainty of a man who'd seen it all. Got herself in trouble, maybe, and took a bus to Chicago. Or maybe she's shacked up with some musician. They do that. She'll turn up when her money runs out. Viola insisted. My Lena isn't like that. My Lena is a good girl. She's ambitious. She works for Arthur Vance. The sergeant's eyes flickered at the name. He wrote it down. We'll look into it, he said, which meant he wouldn't. The file was created, placed in a drawer, and buried within 48 hours. Arthur Vance was a big man, and a missing black girl was not. The case didn't just go cold, it was never warm. Lena Washington, who had dreamed of making stars, had simply vanished into the smog, erased from the glittering, cruel city that never even knew her name. The investigation into Lena Washington's disappearance was not just flawed, it was a deliberate act of erasure, a brutal slamming of a door that had never truly been opened. Viola, her eyes raw and her hands clutching Lena's high school graduation photo, returned to the 77th Street station a week later. She was met this time not by the board desk sergeant, but by a detective in a rumpled suit named Harris, who offered her a lukewarm coffee and a look of profound, weary pity. "Mrs. Washington," he began, his voice a gravelly sigh, "your daughter is 20 years old. She's an adult. We get 100 of these a week. Girls get stars in their eyes, meet a fella, and hop a bus. They're in Reno or New Orleans before the milkman comes." Viola's voice was fierce, shaking with a mother's certainty. "She is not one of these. She is a good girl. She worked at Apex Pictures. For Mr. Arthur Vance. Did you talk to him? He was her boss. He must know something." Detective Harris's face tightened, a mask of professional boredom slipping into place. He'd made one call, as a courtesy. The response from the studio's legal department had been swift, cold, and utterly comprehensive. Mr. Vance was devastated by the news. He considered Lena a bright, promising girl. However, he had noted, with regret, that Miss Washington had been exhibiting erratic behavior for several weeks. She'd been distracted, emotional, taking long lunches. It was even rumored, the studio lawyer had insinuated, that she'd become involved with a dangerous sort, a musician from Central Avenue. A man named Big Red Malone, a notorious jazz player known for his charm, his heroin habit, and the string of girls he'd left behind. The studio considered the matter a private, unfortunate tragedy, and while Mr. Vance offered his deepest sympathies, he had a studio to run. Harris stubbed out his cigarette in a tin ashtray. "Look, lady. You hear that? A musician. That's the oldest story in the book. She's probably shacked up in some apartment in Silver Lake right now." When Viola persisted, her voice breaking as she mentioned the pregnancy, Harris's eyes went cold. He leaned forward, dropping the benevolent act. "Let me give you some advice, Mrs. Washington. You start throwing mud at a man like Arthur Vance, a man who donates to the policeman's benevolent fund, a man who has the mayor on his Christmas card list, you're gonna find yourself in a world of trouble. You have another kid, right? A boy, James? He's what, 12? Walk to school every day. It's a tough neighborhood. Lots of vagrancy laws. It'd be a terrible shame if he got picked up on the wrong street one night, got mistaken for someone else. You understand me?" The threat was unmistakable, a cold blade pressed against her throat. Viola understood everything. The police weren't there to find her daughter. They were there to protect him. She looked at the smirking, indifferent faces in the station, a sea of white men who held her family's fate in their hands and cared nothing for it. She took Lena's photograph, stood up, and walked out without another word. The file was officially closed 3 weeks later, marked voluntary disappearance. No further leads. Suspected involvement with a local musician. Lena Washington was legally, and socially, erased. Time, for Arthur Vance, moved forward in a golden, unbroken blaze. The 1950s cemented his power. He produced Canyon Pass, a sprawling, revisionist western that swept the 1956 Oscars. He followed it with The Starlight Lounge and Rendezvous in Rome, glossy, Technicolor hits that defined the era. His name, printed above the title, became a guarantee of quality and, more importantly, profit. He moved his family from Pasadena to a sprawling estate in Bel Air, a white palace behind high gates, complete with tennis courts, staff quarters, and a 35mm screening room larger than most theaters. The Hollywood Hills property, the one with the concrete slab and the canyon view, had been sold off immediately in 1951 to a shell corporation he controlled, which then sold it to a dentist from Beverly Hills. The paper trail was clean, the connection severed. The dentist, oblivious, built his dream home, installing a kidney-shaped pool and terrazzo floors, pouring thousands of pounds of fresh concrete over the exact spot where Lena lay, sealing it for decades. Vance became a legend. In the 1960s, as the studio system faltered under the assault of television, he navigated the changing tides with predatory grace, creating a new, successful television division for Apex and backing the edgy, independent directors that would define the next decade. He was photographed with presidents, partied with Sinatra at the Sands, and held court at Musso and Frank, his every word on The Business treated as prophecy. He was ruthless, but his ruthlessness was celebrated as vision. He crushed rivals, fired writers with a smile, and recut directors' films in the dead of night, and every time, the film was a hit. His secret, buried deep under a rich man's pool, became a kind of perverse strength. He had done the unspeakable, had eliminated a problem that would have ruined a lesser man, and the world had not punished him. It had rewarded him. It proved his deepest conviction, that he was a man unbound by the rules, a creator and destroyer, a god in his own sun-drenched kingdom. Lena became a fleeting, annoying memory, like a bad investment, a problem he had handled with his usual efficiency. For Lena's family, time did not move, it congealed. It became a thick, gray fog of unanswered questions and suffocating grief. They held a memorial service without a body at the First AME Church in 1952. Viola placed Lena's graduation photograph on the mantel, where it stayed, a silent, smiling accusation against the world. That not knowing was a cancer that ate at the foundations of their home. Every time the phone rang, Viola's heart would leap, a sick jolt of hope and terror. Every news report of an unidentified Jane Doe found in a ditch sent a wave of icy dread through her. The Central Avenue community whispered, at first. Did she run off? Did something bad happen? But as the years passed, she became a ghost story, a cautionary tale for young girls who dreamed too big, who got too close to the white world of Hollywood. Lena's younger brother, James, grew up in the suffocating shadow of the sister he barely remembered and the grief that hollowed out his mother. He saw the terror in her eyes when a police car patrolled their street, the way she flinched from any mention of Hollywood or the movies. He became a quiet, watchful, serious man, a high school history teacher in Compton, determined to live a life as far from the glitter and the danger as possible. He taught his students about the history that wasn't in the books, about the lives and stories that had been deliberately erased, a quiet, lifelong rebellion against the injustice that had swallowed his sister. Viola Washington died in 1984 of a stroke, her mind clouded by dementia in her final years, but her last coherent words to James were, "Find Lena. Don't let them forget her." James, now 45 with a family of his own, tried. He had the photograph. In 1988, he hired a private investigator, a jaded ex-cop who took his money, made a few calls, and came back a week later with a copy of the original 1951 police file. "There's nothing here, Mr. Washington," the PI said, tossing the thin folder on his desk. "The trail's been cold for almost 40 years. The musician, Big Red? He OD'd in '59. The cops involved are long retired or dead. The studio's lawyers will bury you. And Arthur Vance, he's not a man, he's an institution. You can't touch him. Let it go. For your own sake, let her go." In 1992, Arthur Vance, now 83, received the Academy's Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award. The standing ovation in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion lasted for 4 minutes. He stood on stage, frail and spotted, but still radiating a diminished, papery charisma, clutching the golden bust. He wept as he thanked his wife of 55 years, his children, and the magic factory that had given him his life. "I am just a storyteller," he said, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. "And I am so grateful to all the little people, the secretaries, the assistants, the grips, the ones who really make the magic happen. Hollywood," he concluded, raising the award, "is a place where dreams come true. Never, ever stop dreaming." He was an icon, a relic from a golden age, a man who represented the very best of the American dream. He retired to his Bel Air estate, surrounded by his awards, his memories, and the impenetrable fortress of his reputation. The past was not just buried, it was irrelevant. The following spring, in March of 1993, a German techno producer named Klaus Richter bought the 1950s-era house in the Hollywood Hills. He hated the kidney-shaped pool, the terrazzo floors, and the entire mid-century aesthetic. He wanted something minimalist, brutalist, concrete and glass. He hired a construction crew to gut the place, starting with the patio and pool. On March 14, exactly 42 years to the day since Lena Washington had been driven up that hill, a foreman named Miguel Gutierrez was running a jackhammer to break up the old pool decking, which was part of the original 1951 foundation slab. The concrete was unusually thick near the edge of the canyon. He hammered for an hour, the noise deafening, when the sound suddenly changed, a dull, wet thud instead of a sharp crack. He stopped, the sudden silence of the hills ringing in his ears. He knelt, pulling away chunks of rubble, and saw something wrapped in a rotting, tar-like material. He pulled the material back. Underneath was the delicate, unmistakable curve of a human skull, stained dark brown. He backed away slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs, and pulled out his radio. "Hey, boss," his voice shook, you better call the cops. "We got a body." "No. Madre de Dios. I think we got bones." The Hollywood Hills are quiet, but the LAPD is not. By 4 p.m. on March 14, 1993, the construction site was a new kind of studio set, swarming with uniforms, forensics technicians in white paper suits, and detectives. The air, usually smelling of dust and jasmine, now carried the metallic tang of media trucks idling at the bottom of the long drive. Detective Maria Sanchez, 34, with eyes that had seen too much but missed nothing, stepped out of her unmarked sedan. Her partner, Ben Nolan, 55 and 2 years from retirement, joined her, adjusting his tie with a sigh. "God, I hate the hills," he muttered. "Rich people's problems. Even their ghosts are high maintenance." The foreman, Miguel, was sitting on a pile of rubble, chain-smoking, his face pale. He just pointed. It's right there. Under the pool deck. We were just demoing." The grave was shallow, an insult. The concrete of the 1950s pool deck had formed a perfect, airtight seal, mummifying the scene. The body, or what was left of it, was wrapped in a thick, oil-soaked canvas, almost like a tarp, which had partially fused with the bones and the soil. The remains were transported to the L.A. County Coroner's Office, a sterile, cold building that was the antithesis of the sun-baked hill where the victim had been found. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the county's lead forensic anthropologist, took charge. She was a woman who preferred the company of the dead. They told clearer, more honest stories than the living. For 3 days, she and her team worked, meticulously cleaning 4 decades of earth from the evidence. On the 3rd day, she called Sanchez and Nolan into her office. The skeleton was laid out on a steel table. "Meet your victim," Dr. Reed said, her voice flat. "Or victims, as it turns out." Nolan frowned. "Victims?" Dr. Reed pointed to the skull. "Female. African American. Based on cranial suture fusion and dental development, I'd put her at 19, maybe 20 years old." She then indicated the pelvis. "You can see the pubic symphysis. She's young. Very young." She picked up a laminated X-ray. "This is why you're here. See this? Right parietal bone. Depressed fracture, circular, about 2 inches in diameter. Caused by a heavy, blunt object. We found metallic traces consistent with, well, anything from a pipe to a tire iron. The force was substantial. This is what killed her. 1, maybe 2 blows. Instantaneous." Sanchez felt the familiar cold knot in her stomach. "And the second victim?" Dr. Reed gestured to a separate, smaller tray. On it lay a collection of heartbreakingly tiny bones. Fetal remains. Vertebrae like grains of rice, the skull no bigger than a golf ball. I'd estimate 18 to 20 weeks gestation. 4 to 5 months. Your victim was pregnant when she was murdered. The story exploded. The Hollywood Hills skeleton was on every news channel, the LA Times running a front-page story. The ghoulish detail of a body under a pool, combined with the glamour of the location, was irresistible. Reporters dug into the house's history. They traced the 1951 sale from the dentist back to a shell corporation, AV Enterprises. And AV Enterprises, a young, hungry reporter from the Valley paper discovered, was a holding company registered in 1948 to one Arthur Vance. The connection was made. The skeleton in the hills was now the Apex Mogul's mansion mystery. The media narrative was one of old Hollywood glamour and dark secrets. Sanchez, however, was not interested in glamour. She was in the department's digital archives, running a search that would have been impossible 10 years prior. Missing persons, 1951, female, black, age 18 to 25. The database whirred and spat out a dozen names. Most had been resolved, runaways found, deaths accounted for. Except one. Lena Washington. File 3-1-5-9-2. Status, closed. Voluntary disappearance. Sanchez pulled the physical file, a single thin folder brittle with age. Inside, she found the board notes from Detective Harris, the mention of Big Red Malone, the insinuation of erratic behavior. And stapled to the inside cover, a small, 2x2-inch black and white photo. A young woman in a graduation cap and gown, her smile bright, her eyes full of a future that never happened. Ben, Sanchez called out, her voice tight. I think I found her. Dr. Reed's team, using the skull, had been working on a forensic facial reconstruction. When Sanchez brought them Lena's photo, the resemblance was jarring. The wide-set, intelligent eyes. The curve of the cheekbones. The strong line of the jaw. It was her. They had a name. Finding the family was the next step. Nolan, using old city directories and property records, traced the Washington family from Central Avenue to Compton. He found James Washington, 62, a retired high school history teacher. On March 21, Sanchez and Nolan drove to his quiet, tidy home. James, a tall, serious man with his sister's watchful eyes, met them on the porch. Mr. Washington, Sanchez began gently, we're from the LAPD Cold Case Unit. This is about your sister, Lena. James Washington froze. He hadn't heard that name from a police officer in his entire adult life. He led them into his living room. On the mantel, next to photos of his own children and grandchildren, was a framed copy of Lena's graduation picture. Sanchez took a deep breath. Sir, 42 years ago, your mother reported your sister missing. That investigation, it was not handled correctly. It wasn't handled at all, James said, his voice hard. We have reason to believe we found her, Sanchez said. Human remains were discovered last week at a construction site in the Hollywood Hills. She laid out the official photos of the reconstruction next to the graduation picture. The connection was absolute, a silent confirmation that bridged 4 decades. James Washington stared at the images, his face impassive for a long, terrible moment. Then, his shoulders began to shake. He sat down heavily, the grief of a 12-year-old boy finally allowed to surface in a 62-year-old man. He wept, not for the skeleton, but for the smiling girl, for his mother who had died waiting, for the lifetime of not knowing. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with a grief that had curdled into a cold, hard rage. My mother, he said, she went to the cops. She told them everything. She told them Lena was pregnant. Nolan and Sanchez exchanged a look. That detail had never been in the file. And she told them who she thought was responsible, James continued. A man Lena worked for. The man she was involved with. The man who threatened my mother to keep quiet. Sanchez leaned forward, her pen poised. Mr. Washington. What was his name? James looked up, his eyes meeting hers, the fire of 42 years of injustice burning in them. "Vance," he said. "Arthur Vance." The name Arthur Vance was a nuclear bomb dropped into the middle of their investigation. It shifted everything. This wasn't a forgotten crime, it was a foundational one, a secret at the very core of the Hollywood myth. Sanchez and Nolan found themselves in the eye of a storm. The media was no longer just reporting on a cold case, they were hunting a legend. Paparazzi camped outside the gates of Vance's Bel Air estate, their long lenses like sniper rifles aimed at the fortress. The studio, now a multinational conglomerate that had absorbed Apex Pictures in the 70s, issued a terse no comment, but their legal department went into overdrive, sending high-priced lawyers to the LAPD with veiled threats about defaming a beloved public figure. But Sanchez and Nolan had something stronger than threats. They had Lena's bones, and they had James Washington, a living witness to the 1951 cover-up. They spent a week building an ironclad, circumstantial case. They confirmed AV Enterprises was, in fact, Arthur Vance's personal holding company, dissolved in 1955. They found the original building permits for the Hollywood Hills lot, signed by Vance himself. They scoured old newspapers and found a social column from March 1951 mentioning Vance was distraught over the sudden departure of a favorite assistant. The narrative was being crafted even as Lena's body was cooling. They found no trace of the doctor who had confirmed Lena's pregnancy. He had likely been paid in cash, his records long since dust. They didn't need him. They had the fetal remains. They had the motive. They had the opportunity. On March 28, 1993, they drove the unmarked sedan through the opulent, winding roads of Bel Air. The air smelled of money, chlorine, and night-blooming jasmine. They were admitted through the massive gates by a private security guard and met at the door of the White Mansion by a team of 3 lawyers, all pinstripes and hostile glares. "Mr. Vance is 83 years old and in frail health," the lead attorney, a man named Silver, said. "He has agreed to speak with you for 10 minutes, against our strenuous advice, simply to clear up this slanderous nonsense. Be advised, this conversation is being recorded." They were led into a vast, sun-drenched library. Books lined the walls, but the real trophies were the awards, Oscars, Golden Globes, and the Thalberg bust, all gleaming on shelves. And there, in a high-backed leather chair by the window, sat Arthur Vance. He was ancient, a pale, papery-skinned man swimming in an expensive cashmere robe, an oxygen tube clipped to his nose. But his eyes, when they met Sanchez's, were not frail. They were sharp, cold, and utterly unchanged from the 1950s photographs. "Detectives," he rasped, his voice a dry rustle. "To what do I owe this interruption?" Sanchez sat opposite him, Nolan standing by the door. She placed her briefcase on the priceless Persian rug and opened it. She didn't pull out files. She pulled out the 8x10 photo of Lena's graduation. "We're here about Lena Washington," Sanchez said, her voice calm and clear in the quiet room. Vance's eyes flickered to the photo, his expression unchanged. "Lena? My goodness. That was a lifetime ago. Sweet girl. A terrible shame what happened to her. Ran off with some musicians, as I recall." "She didn't run off, Mr. Vance," Nolan said from the door, his voice a low growl. "She was murdered. We found her," Sanchez continued, sliding the photo across the table. "Buried under the pool deck of your old property in the Hollywood Hills. The one you owned through AV Enterprises." The lawyers started to object, but Vance raised one, trembling hand to silence them. He stared at Lena's smiling face. "She was 19, Sanchez said. And she was 4 to 5 months pregnant. We found the baby's bones, too." Vance's composure, the mask he had worn for 42 years, did not shatter. It dissolved, like wet paper. His body seemed to shrink, the arrogance evaporating until only a very old, very frightened man remained. He looked from the photo to Sanchez, his blue eyes suddenly wet. She was going to tell, he whispered, the words audible only to them. She was going to tell my wife. Mr. Vance, his lawyer barked, you will not say another word. But Arthur Vance couldn't stop. The dam had broken. 42 years of silence, of success built on a grave, came pouring out in a ragged, wheezing confession. The lawyers stood by, impotent, as their legendary client dismantled his own legacy, word by word. It had started just as his family had feared. He'd noticed Lena, her ambition a palpable, electric thing. He loved that. He'd groomed her, fed her ambition with scripts and praise, made her believe he was her ally. The affair was easy. He was a god, and she was a girl who wanted to be in heaven. She was smart, he rasped, smarter than any of them. She understood the business. Then, the complication. The pregnancy. His voice turned hard, a flicker of the old rage. I was on the verge, he said, just about to get the green light for Canyon Pass. My wife's father, he controlled the studio's financing. A scandal like that, a black mistress, a child, it would have been the end. Not just of my career. Of me. He'd promised her everything. The doctor, the fix. He told her it had to be private, for her sake. He drove her up to the empty lot himself, in his Cadillac. Before we reveal the final, terrible details of that night, please take a moment to subscribe and click the like button. Your support helps us ensure that stories like Lena's are never forgotten. Vance described the night with a chilling, cinematic clarity. He'd told her to wait by the edge of the slab, to look at the lights, to pick out her future home. He'd gotten the tire iron from the trunk. She was unreasonable, he hissed, the self-justification still potent after 4 decades. She said she didn't want the fix. She said she wanted me. She wanted to be my wife. She threatened to go to my home, to tell my wife, to tell the press. She said she deserved it. He'd hit her from behind. Just once. The sound, he said, was dull. He hadn't expected it to be so simple. He'd had a canvas tarp in the trunk, one from the props department. He'd wrapped her in it, pushed her into a shallow ditch left by the builders, right where the patio was slated to be poured. He'd gone home, showered, and kissed his sleeping children. The next morning, he made a call to his contractor. I need that pool deck poured. Today. I'll pay double for the rush. By the time Viola Washington was filing a missing persons report, her daughter was already sealed in 3 tons of concrete. The arrest of Arthur Vance was a media supernova. The image of the 83-year-old icon, being wheeled from his Bel Air mansion in pajamas, an oxygen tank beside him, his hands cuffed in his lap, was broadcast around the world. It shattered the myth of Hollywood's golden age, revealing the rot beneath the gilding. The Academy, in a panic, convened an emergency meeting and voted to rescind his 1992 Thalberg Award, an unprecedented act. His son, now the CEO of a rival studio, refused to post his bail. The family he had protected with murder had, in the end, abandoned him. James Washington stood on the steps of the LA courthouse, surrounded by cameras, and finally spoke his family's truth. They called my sister a runaway, he said, his voice shaking with righteous anger. They called my mother a liar. For 42 years, that man accepted awards and applause, while my sister lay in the dirt. There is no lifetime achievement for what he did. There is only justice. Arthur Vance, his health failing rapidly, pleaded guilty to 1 count of murder in the 2nd degree. He avoided a trial, but not his sentence. On August 10, 1993, a judge sentenced him to 15 years to life, a symbolic gesture. He was transferred to the prison ward at USC Medical Center, where he died 11 weeks later of congestive heart failure. His obituaries were brutal, his glittering career reduced to a single, dark footnote. On a sunny afternoon in September, James Washington, his children, and his grandchildren held a funeral for Lena. They buried her ashes in the plot next to her mother, Viola. The new headstone bore the name that had been erased for so long, Lena Washington. 1931 to 1951. Beloved daughter and sister. Found at last. Her story was no longer a secret, no longer a ghost story whispered on Central Avenue. It was history, finally told, finally true, a somber, final credit roll for a life that had ended far too soon.